The colony was peaceful, nestled on the outskirts of human-controlled space. Its people lived simple lives, far removed from the conflicts that rippled across the galaxy. Children's laughter echoed through its sunlit streets, a harmony of innocence and hope. But peace, as it often does, painted a target on their backs. The Galactic Syndicate's assassins moved with practiced precision, cloaked in the shadows of dusk. Their orders were clear: eliminate the targets and leave no survivors. They struck swiftly, their weapons cutting through defenses like a blade through silk. It was over in minutes, a massacre that left no one standing. Amid the wreckage, a child's small body lay still, clutching a worn toy spaceship. It was a gift from his grandfather, General Marcus Varric, a man who had once been the spearhead of humanity's greatest military campaigns. The assassins didn't know who the boy's grandfather was. To them, it was another job completed, another loose end tied. They melted into the void, leaving behind silence and ash. Light years away, Marcus Varric was enjoying the twilight of his years. A holographic transmission disrupted the calm of his secluded home. His face turned ashen as he watched the footage: a charred colony, the lifeless form of his grandson, and that unmistakable toy lying beside him. Varric sat in silence, the weight of grief pressing down on him like a crushing tide. The boy had been his anchor to a world beyond war, his hope for a future untainted by bloodshed. Now, that hope lay in ruins. He picked up the toy, his fingers trembling, and stared at it as if willing the memories to return. They did, unbidden and raw. The boy's laughter. The shared stories of the stars. The dreams of a better tomorrow. But tomorrow had been stolen. The assassins had taken more than a life. They had awakened a force that had been dormant for too long. Far away, the Syndicate's operatives reported their success. In their eyes, humans were insignificant, a species of fragmented worlds and scattered colonies. A message was sent to their higher-ups, boasting of their efficiency. They laughed over drinks, mocking the weak resistance they'd faced. Humans, they believed, weren't worth fearing. Back in his study, Varric's grief turned to something colder and sharper. Rage. The kind of rage that can shape destinies and topple empires. He opened a dusty cabinet, revealing relics of a past life, a commander's insignia, datapads filled with tactical blueprints, and weapons that hadn't seen the light of day in years. He activated a concealed console. The screen hummed to life, displaying a list of names. Some had faded, marked as deceased or missing, but others still glowed green. Old comrades. Soldiers who had once fought beside him in humanity's darkest hours. He sent a single message. They've taken too much. It's time to remind the galaxy who we are. The console's hum faded, leaving Varric alone with his thoughts. He wasn't just grieving a loss. He was preparing for war. Varric's message rippled across the galaxy, waking ghosts of battles long past. Those who had fought alongside him knew the weight of his words. They owed their lives to him, and the call to arms was impossible to ignore. Responses poured in. Some came from old warships hidden in asteroid belts, others from planets where veterans had tried to build quiet lives. Each one carried a singular sentiment. For you, Marcus, we rise again. Humanity's scattered military remnants began to mobilize under Varric's command. They weren't just soldiers. They were tacticians, engineers, and operatives honed by years of warfare. Despite their years apart, they moved with the precision of a single organism, fueled by the promise of justice. Quietly, they worked in the shadows, gathering intelligence, salvaging weapons, and readying themselves for the storm. Varric didn't waste time. He used every resource at his disposal to piece together the Syndicate's operations. They were a vast and dangerous network, but their strength was also their weakness. Syndicates thrived on arrogance, believing no one could challenge them. Varric knew better. He exploited their overconfidence, planting misinformation in their communication lines and probing their defenses for vulnerabilities. The first strike came without warning. A Syndicate supply station, heavily fortified and thought impenetrable, was obliterated in minutes. Varric's forces hit them with precision, targeting key systems and leaving no survivors. It wasn't just an attack, it was a message. Carved into the scorched walls of the station was a simple phrase: "One for all." The syndicate's response was swift but predictable. They doubled their patrols and reinforced their outposts, unaware that they were playing into Varek's hands. His strategy wasn't just to destroy, it was to instill fear. Every syndicate ship that ventured into human territory vanished without a trace. Outposts found their supply lines severed, their communications scrambled, and their personnel missing. As the syndicate's losses mounted, whispers of Varek's name began to circulate. They spoke of a ghost from humanity's past, a legend who had risen from retirement to wage a war of vengeance. The syndicate's leaders dismissed these stories as myths. To them, humans were fragmented and weak, a nuisance, not a threat. Their arrogance cost them dearly. Varek's forces launched a coordinated assault on 3 key syndicate installations. The attacks were brutal and efficient, leaving the syndicate scrambling to recover. They underestimated Varek's tactical brilliance, failing to see the larger picture. Each strike wasn't just a blow to their infrastructure, it was a piece of a larger puzzle. But Varek didn't stop there. He played the syndicate against itself, spreading rumors of betrayal within their ranks. The seeds of mistrust took root, and their once cohesive network began to fracture. Syndicate operatives turned on each other, desperate to protect their own interests. Varek watched from the shadows, using their chaos to further his plans. The syndicate's leaders convened in secret, desperate to make sense of their losses. They speculated about their enemy, crafting theories to explain the precision and ferocity of the attacks. None of them could fathom the truth, that the retired general of a species they considered insignificant was systematically dismantling their empire. But Varek didn't revel in their confusion. He stayed focused, knowing that every victory brought him closer to his ultimate goal. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. The syndicate had taken his grandson, but they had also underestimated humanity. Varek would make them pay for both mistakes, one calculated strike at a time. As the syndicate scrambled to regain control, Varek prepared for the next phase of his plan. His forces were ready, his targets identified, and his resolve unshaken. The galaxy had forgotten the strength of humanity's will. Varek was determined to remind them. The relentless campaign reached its crescendo as Varek closed in on the heart of the syndicate's operations. The path had been paved with precision and calculated devastation, each strike stripping away their power and leaving them increasingly vulnerable. Varek's forces had become an unstoppable storm, and now, the storm was about to break upon the syndicate's central command. Intelligence gathered from the syndicate's fragmented communication lines revealed the location of their main stronghold, a heavily fortified station hidden deep within a nebula. It was their nerve center, the place from which they orchestrated their operations across the galaxy. Varek knew this would be the final battleground, the point where the war would either end or escalate to a scale no one could control. The assault was planned to the last detail. Varek's forces moved like clockwork, exploiting every weakness and gap in the syndicate's defenses. Their fleet approached silently, using the nebula's chaotic energy fields to mask their presence. As they closed in, the syndicate's defenses activated, but it was too late. The first wave of Varek's attack struck with devastating force, cutting through their outer defenses like a knife through cloth. Inside the station, chaos reigned. Syndicate operatives scrambled to respond, their once coordinated systems now riddled with confusion and paranoia. Varek had spent weeks sowing seeds of distrust within their ranks, and now, the cracks in their organization were fully exposed. Some operatives abandoned their posts, while others turned on each other, each suspecting betrayal. It was a perfect storm of fear and disarray. But as Varek's forces breached the inner sanctum of the station, they discovered something unexpected. The station's command center was eerily quiet, its leaders absent. Instead, they found a single captive, an officer who had been left behind as bait. Under interrogation, the officer revealed the truth. The attack on Varek's family had been a calculated move, orchestrated not by the syndicate alone but by a faction within humanity itself. The revelation hit Varek like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a trap designed to provoke him into action. The conspirators within humanity had seen him as a weapon, a force that could be unleashed to destabilize the galaxy and reignite a war they could profit from. They had used his grief, his love for his grandson, as a tool to manipulate him. For a moment, Varek's resolve wavered. The weight of betrayal threatened to overwhelm him. He had fought this war believing it was about justice, about protecting humanity's future. Now, he realized that he had been a pawn in a larger game. But even in the face of this revelation, Varek's purpose didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. He wouldn't let his grandson's death be reduced to a mere calculation in someone else's scheme. He made a choice. Instead of turning his rage inward, he directed it with even greater precision. The Syndicate would pay for their role in this, but he would also ensure that those within humanity who had betrayed him faced justice. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about ensuring that no one else would suffer as he had. As Varek's forces secured the station, he transmitted a message to his allies, sharing what he had learned. The news sent shockwaves through their ranks, but it also strengthened their resolve. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to root out the corruption that had tainted their cause. With the Syndicate's central command in ruins, Varek turned his attention to his next target. The conspirators within humanity had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated his ability to adapt, to see beyond their manipulation. And now, they would face the full force of his wrath. Varek was no longer just a general avenging his grandson. He was a man determined to cleanse the galaxy of those who had dared to use his pain as a weapon. With the Syndicate's command in shambles and their network crumbling, Varek prepared for the final step of his mission. The galaxy now watched, stunned by the ferocity and precision of his campaign. What had begun as a single act of grief-fueled vengeance had grown into something far larger, a reckoning that had reshaped the balance of power. But Varek's work was far from over. He knew the true enemy still lingered in the shadows, pulling strings to serve their own agenda. The remnants of the Syndicate leadership were holed up in a fortified refuge, their once grand confidence shattered. Varek's forces converged on the location, their approach silent and unrelenting. The Syndicate, once an unstoppable force feared across the galaxy, had been reduced to desperation. Their leaders begged for reinforcements, but none came. The galaxy, now wary of humanity's resurgence, chose to watch from the sidelines, unwilling to risk Varek's wrath. When Varek's forces breached the refuge, the final confrontation unfolded not with chaos but with chilling precision. The Syndicate leaders were brought before him, trembling and broken. They offered pleas, excuses, and empty promises of surrender, but Varek met them with cold silence. This was justice, not the kind written in treaties or declared by governments, but the kind that came from the unwavering resolve of a man who had lost everything. Varek issued a single warning, broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Harm one human, and you face us all. There will be no mercy, no negotiations, no second chances. Let this be your only lesson. The message echoed through space, a stark reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed to its limits. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of their place in the galaxy. But as the Syndicate leaders were dealt with, Varek turned his focus to the deeper betrayal. The faction within humanity that had orchestrated this chaos could not be allowed to thrive in the aftermath. Using the intelligence gathered from the Syndicate's network, he began dismantling their operations. Each lead brought him closer to the architects of the conspiracy, exposing their greed and ambition to the very people they sought to manipulate. These conspirators were cunning, their resources vast, but they were no match for Varek's determination. He exposed their plans to humanity, rallying support from those who had been disillusioned by the war. What they had hoped to spark as a conflict to serve their interests became their undoing. The very soldiers they sought to exploit turned against them, erasing their influence piece by piece. Through it all, Varek carried the memory of his grandson as his guiding star. Every step he took, every decision he made, was driven by the desire to ensure no other family would endure the pain he had suffered. He understood now that his fight wasn't just about vengeance, or even justice. It was about creating a future where humanity could stand united, unbroken by external threats or internal corruption. As the final conspirators were captured, Varric allowed himself a moment of reflection. He returned to the ruins of his grandson's colony, the toy spaceship still clutched in his hand. The galaxy had been changed by his actions, but so had he. He was no longer the man who had retired to seek peace in the quiet corners of the stars. He had become something more, a symbol of humanity's resilience and unyielding will. In the aftermath, the galaxy remained on edge, but it also carried a newfound respect for humanity. The Syndicate was gone, their empire scattered, and those who had sought to manipulate the conflict had been brought to justice. Humanity's message had been heard loud and clear. They were no longer to be underestimated. Varric returned to his quiet home, not as the man he once was but as the one who had ensured his grandson's legacy would endure. His fight was over, but the future he had secured belonged to all of humanity. And for the first time since the tragedy that had started it all, he allowed himself a moment of peace.